Tonight on Business PNG. Hi, I'm Festus Maganap. Welcome to this edition of Business PNG. Papua New Guinea is positioned just right to benefit from the Asian economic boom. This century has been labeled the era of the Asian economy. Asia has proven to be the engine of global economic growth, and we are part of that. Senior Australian business and economic commentator Michael Pascoe told us recently that much of what we hear about China's economic recession is over-exaggerated by the global media. Much of the negative press comes from the fact that China will be the world's #1 economy in just 5 years' time.
Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Michael, you're here to attend a conference at the moment, and you have some good news for Papua New Guinea, I believe.
Well, it's good news, I think, for all countries that are still very much dependent upon commodities, in that there are a lot of scary headlines around the world at the moment. Europe, of course, is facing a miserable decade of recession. The United States has put off some of its problems until after the presidential election. They're charging towards a fiscal cliff that could send them back into recession. But most importantly, there are lots of scary headlines around about China, whether or not China is slowing too quickly, whether there's a China bubble. And that's caused a lot of fear in commodity markets. The good news is that the window of opportunity for commodities countries is still open. A lot of the headlines about China in particular are simply wrong. There's an entire industry out there devoted to trying to tear down the China story, mainly run out of the United States. There are people in the US who just can't bear the idea that the Chinese economy will be the world's #1 in just 5 years' time. And so anything negative about China gets written, the positive stuff does not get written. And I'll be explaining at the conference why I think the China story has a long way further to run yet, and that still fundamentally underwrites commodities demand. Certainly underwrites PNG's major trading partner, Australia, and underwrites demand throughout the region. This is the Asian century. PNG and Australia are both part of Asia.
Now, Michael, you say that's good news generally to the global industry, I suppose. How does that relate specifically to where PNG is at the moment?
PNG is still very much a commodities-dependent economy in terms of exports. It means the opportunity is there for PNG to capitalise on increased demand for commodities right across the board, foodstuffs as well as minerals. Now, just because the opportunity is there, it doesn't mean that PNG will do it. While that window is open, while China is growing so quickly still, that fundamentally provides the money to get infrastructure right, to get services right. Now, it's up to each country to do those things or they fail. While that window of opportunity is open, while demand is so strong for the commodities that PNG produces, there's money coming into the country, there's the chance to get it right. But it's up to each country to do that.
In our economic situation at the moment, and I know there is a huge growth in this economy at the moment, how do you see us specifically taking advantage of our relationships with China?
Well, I keep saying China, and I'm at fault for that. I should be talking about the emerging nations in total. It's really is Asia. It's just easy to talk about China because that's where the big numbers are, and that's where the flashy talk is. But it's bigger than that. It's all of Asia. I became convinced many years ago that the most powerful economic driver on earth is a mother's desire to see her child have a better chance in life than she had.
Agree.
And once you have that in place, once you have that door open, that potential for people to see the next generation can have a better chance, that is a very powerful force. That door's been opened another couple of billion people just in China and India as they've joined the Western economy, the open economy, to get ahead. Now, that means that across the board, there are opportunities in the things that PNG does best. The potential here for agriculture, minerals are obvious. We can all see the mineral story. We can all see, it's a straight demand supply question. Beyond that, though, the potential to make the best of PNG agriculture, that demands investment, that demands good governance, and it demands smart people being entrepreneurial about giving Asia what it wants. It doesn't have to be China. It can be Indonesia, it can be Malaysia, it can be Australia. But that drive is in place, and I use China as shorthand for the entire region.
Just going back to the mother's desire for the child, do you see that Australia might be the mother of PNG?
Australia.
Might it be Australia's desire for us to to go ahead as financially, economically grow?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question on about 10 levels. Have we got all day? Or look, among Australians who have had any involvement with PNG, and there is a rich history of involvement, I think there remains a genuinely emotional touch and fondness. I think for Australians who at a political and strategic level just see the importance of PNG as our closest neighbour succeeding, because the idea of PNG not succeeding is horrific. 7 million people, if PNG is not going to make the best of its opportunities, would be a strategic problem for Australia in all sorts of ways. So, there's both an emotional and a very hard strategic reason for Australia to want PNG to succeed. But it's not what Australia wants, it's what PNG wants and what the people of PNG want and how prepared they are to fight for it.
And with our current economic strength, there's threats that come with it, but most of it internally. Mr. Pascoe expounds on that when we come back. Our economic position at the moment is sound, and short-term projections are very good. But all this comes with internal threats. With the increase in revenue, the matter at hand is how well funds are spent. There's a need for accountability, with much emphasis on investment in infrastructure, delivery of services, and good governance.
I know that you've had some connection with PNG for quite some time, I suppose, in your journalistic life. What do you think about the position we're at the moment? Are there threats to the fact that we are very economically strong at the moment, or that we are growing, I should say?
Look, PNG's major threats are internal, and that is investment in infrastructure and the delivery of services and good governance. They're things that no one else can solve. The raising of revenue, the revenue's there, it's how it's being spent. And people in PNG know a lot better than I do how the delivery of services has gone over the past few decades. 37 years, there's a question to be asked, is the delivery of services getting better or getting worse? That's the major threat to PNG. Looking at the infrastructure during this brief visit, there are easy examples. The amount of time it takes to get a ship unloaded in Port Moresby, that adds costs to everything that happens in PNG. The amount of time it takes to load a ship, to get a ship into dock and loaded, adds costs to anyone who wants to export from PNG. Now, they are solvable problems if the political will exists here. The problem of land security, of course, you know better than I do, is something that has to be solved, because you won't get the investment and you won't get the value add and the intellectual property transfer unless there can be security of land for any major investor. So they're the threats. That window of opportunity that is open now, underwritten by China, it doesn't stay open forever. Eventually China's growth matures. I don't know when that is, it's some time off, but when that matures, chances are that prices won't be as good just for mineral commodities. There will be better prices for services, better prices for soft commodities, but if the infrastructure is not in place, if the deliverance of services is not in place, if internal security doesn't improve, there are a lot of other countries in the world.
There are indeed. Michael, I just want to go back to the relationship between Australia and PNG, and there is a deep emotional attachment with Australia. Is Australia now in a position to let us go, per se, to let us take tentative steps to perhaps discovering relationships with other countries? I know that we've had a look north policy. Our previous Prime Minister, Pius Wingti, I'm sure you're aware, way back in the 80s or the 90s, I stand corrected here, had a look north policy, and I know that caused quite some consternation at the time. Is Australia now willing to let us stand and to toddle off in different directions?
Australia, independence was 37 years ago. I can't speak for the politicians. I wouldn't want to speak for the politicians of either Australian party. But Papua New Guinea makes its own future. It makes its own relationships. And certainly, I think Australia would be all in favour of PNG extending its web of influences and extending its trade partners and its economic partners, because that makes it stronger. I don't think Australia has the paranoia that the United States has about China. I don't think Australia has that sort of paranoia. There is always a concern for inappropriate influences over any government, including our own, from big money in the region. And that is a concern based on the best interests of PNG, not on Australia. And I think there are a lot of Australian taxpayers who'd be very happy to see PNG stronger, because it would cost Australia less.
Yes, there would be. It's a valued opinion, Michael. What are you hoping are going to be the outcomes? What are the messages that the people listening to you take?
You know, everyone can see the opportunities in PNG. Sometimes people see the problems bigger in front of them, and that gets in the way of the opportunities. I think the conference will be a success if it spells out both of them well. If it makes clear that, you know, here are the good returns available, but also here are the roadblocks that are stopping PNG and stopping ordinary citizens of PNG from sharing in the wealth that is being created. Because if there's not a well-governed sharing of the wealth, internal security goes downhill, and then no one's better off. So that's the hope of the conference, both to put up the opportunities, to be straightforward about the problems, and if the opportunities are strong enough, people of goodwill can get over the problems. And they extend across the board. Sometimes you think, you know, particularly in agriculture, I think any farmer has to be made of very stern stuff to fight the elements and prices and seasons. And you know, you look at the opportunity for cocoa at the moment internationally. The price for chocolate is high. The world's leading confectioners are desperate to get another supply out of Africa, aside from Africa. And yet you've got a problem with borers that have wiped out a lot of the crop here.
That's right.
Life is very cruel in agriculture. There are always ups and downs, but that also means there are opportunities there for those who can manage it and get it right, and prices are good if they can.
Michael, what would be your advice to people looking to invest in Papua New Guinea at this time?
Look, it'll be two-pronged. One, yes, see the opportunity, realise the incredible natural wealth of this nation, the desire of so many Papua New Guineans to improve their lot and the country's lot, but they've got to do it with their eyes open. They've got to do it realising what the problems are, having their own risk mitigation strategies in place, and then I think realise there are a lot of people making a lot of very good money in PNG, and the fabulous natural riches of this nation have the opportunity to underwrite it for a number of years.
Thank you. Beautiful compliment to this country, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
After the break, we speak to Paul Grunwald, the ANZ Bank's Chief Economist for Asia. If you've just joined us, you're watching Business PNG. Now, apart from Australia being Papua New Guinea's #1 trading partner, China also contributes immensely to our export revenue. However, with the current boom in the north, there are other Asian countries that have proven possible future trading partners, such as India, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. Of these 4 countries, India came out on the top in an ANZ Bank research, as we have a lot we could offer in terms of commodity supplies.
Thank you for joining us. I've got with me today Paul Grunwald, Chief Economist, Asia Pacific for ANZ. Welcome to the show, Paul.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Very nice to have you. Let's just talk about the global economy. How are things looking for us and the European Union and China?
Let's start with the bad stuff. We think the European Union still has some work to do. We still don't have clarity on how we're going to deal with the debts, how we're going to deal with the banks and what the exit strategy is. Unlike the US, we cannot see the end of the tunnel yet in Europe, so we think the policymakers have some work to do. The good news is that China is continuing to grow reasonably well. It's still an investment-led economy. We've got a lot of infrastructure that needs to be done. We're still moving 15, 20 million people per year from the countryside into the cities. So this means commodity prices, in particular hard commodity prices, are going to be well supported. That's good news for countries like PNG.
It is indeed. And is there any concern that PNG should be feeling about these countries and their economies?
Well, China's raised some concerns because we're used to having China grow by 9 or 10%, and now we're about 7%. So people are asking whether this is the end of the China story, and we don't think so. It's a structural story of urbanization, industrialization. There are going to be some ups and downs. We're going to see patches where maybe we get too carried away with some of the high-end investment, but the authorities there have a lot of ammunition on their public balance sheet. They have a desire to keep growth strong. So we actually think growth is troughing right now at about 7%. We should be able to pick up a bit through the rest of the year into 2013. So that, again, good news for the countries that are leveraged into that investment build in China.
Now, commodity prices are close to their 100-year average. Should this be a problem for PNG?
No, we actually think that's a good story. There's a view that we've had a commodity bubble and that commodity prices are too high. And what my colleague Warren Hogan's been showing our clients is that commodities are actually close to their 100-year average. And it's really the 1980s and 1990s that were the aberration, where global investment in infrastructure was historically very low and commodity prices were depressed. But that shouldn't be our best benchmark. If we take a longer view of commodity prices, they're right now about where they should be on a long-term average, which I find very interesting. I think a lot of people are very surprised at that result.
Good news and bad news somewhere.
Yes.
Now, in terms of trading partners, the world's quite focused on China at the moment because of their strong economic growth. If not China, then what other countries should PNG be looking at in terms of trade?
Right. If we talk about this infrastructure story and the demand for base metals and the things that PNG excels at in terms of its export basket, we think there's more news coming on the horizon from Asia. Yes, China's the big story now, but behind China we have another group of countries: India, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. Those countries together tend to score poorly on some of these global measures of infrastructure, for example, done by the World Bank. The countries' governments are very aware of the need to ramp up the infrastructure spending, so we think this is the next wave. Those four together are about 2/3 the size of China, so they're not a perfect offset, but it's certainly a story that suggests the momentum of this infrastructure build in Asia, and the demand for hard commodities is going to continue. It's not going to end with China.
Okay. Why do you think India is a good trading partner for PNG?
Well, we looked at, we did a kind of hypothetical exercise in one of our research papers, and we lined up the Pacific's exports, including PNG's, with the imports of Asian countries, and we were very surprised that India came out at or near the top for almost every country in the Pacific. That means India needs what this region has. So again, going forward, China is going to be a big story for PNG, but we think increasingly India is going to be a bigger part of the story. It's still going to be dominated by Australia. Australia is by far still the biggest trading partner of most Pacific countries. But you know, as we go forward, the export exposure, if you will, in terms of geographies, is going to pan out. And we think South Asia and Southeast Asia, including India, are going to be part of that story.
Now, you've said that we're the biggest economy in the Pacific, but our GDP per capita is not as good as, say, Fiji or Tonga. Why is that?
Right. I think ultimately that boils down to productivity and human capital, and PNG is very focused on a few sectors that do extraordinarily well, but a country like Fiji, I think, has a bit more breadth in terms of product and productive base and probably human capital. So it's something that PNG should aspire to. PNG is kind of in the middle of the Pacific right now in terms of per capita income, but it's growing really fast. I think the resource boom from the LNG and the Sovereign Wealth Fund and those resources being available to invest in things like education and health to get the human capital up in PNG, I think productivity follows and then per capita income follows. So that's the line of thinking to get the per capita income level up.
So how do we fare against, say, Timor and Solomon Islands in terms of exports and imports?
Gross volumes, or in terms of
gross volumes?
Oh, well, yeah. When we look at the Pacific, we kind of divide it into two sub-regions. We have Timor, Solomons and PNG, which are more the hard commodities and energy. They've done very well over the last couple of years. Growth has tended to be higher. They're in the right sectors at the right time. The rest of the Pacific, more traditional export bases based on agriculture, based on marine products, not quite as spectacular as some of the hard commodities and energy. So we think that's actually going to continue. We think we're going to continue to see this wedge in Pacific growth, where this part of the Pacific is probably going to outperform the rest of the Pacific. We're all in a good neighborhood. We're all connected to the Asia growth story and the rising middle class and the infrastructure, and we've got Australia there, which is by far the best performing industrial country. So we're in a good neighborhood. We've just got some countries in the Pacific doing better than others.
Great news for this region.
I think it is.
Now, there's a lot of concern about growth and inflation. Where should PNG focus?
Right now, PNG probably wants to look at inflation. I think growth is still very high. Historically, we wouldn't expect growth of close to 10% to be the norm, maybe something in the mid-single digits. As long as we have that in play, as long as we have the pressure on wages, which we're hearing very clearly from a number of people across the spectrum, as long as the commodity prices remain relatively high, I think the authorities need to be vigilant. We don't see a lot of evidence of high inflation momentum right now, but if you asking me which of those two they should be worried about, let's say in the near term from a policy perspective, I think they would have to put more weight on inflation.
Thank you for your time today, Paul.
It's been my pleasure.
Do stay with us. President of the Port Moresby Chamber of Commerce and Industry, David Korn, speaks with Robert Aiello, Senior Energy Specialist with the World Bank on hydropower generation. That's on the other side of the break. It is proven that hydropower accounts for about 20% of electricity generation globally and is very significant for developing economies. Papua New Guinea, however, has the lowest electrification rate in the world, with less than 15% of our population having access to power supply. The current government, however, is adamant on tapping into hydropower generation. Projects such as the Yonki Dam project that will cost the government over 100 million kina in refurbishment exercise, the new Ramutu powerhouse project that has an estimated cost of about 2 billion kina, and the Purari project that's estimated to be worth 25 billion kina and would be the biggest power project in the Oceania region. Here's the interview between David Korn from the Port Moresby Chamber of Commerce and Industry and World Bank's Robert Aiello.
Welcome to Business PNG. With me in the studio today, Roberto Aiello, the Senior Energy Specialist for the Asia Pacific region with the World Bank. Roberto, welcome and welcome to Business PNG.
Thank you very much, David.
Huge potential for hydropower in the Pacific region and in Papua New Guinea?
Well, yes, David. Look, let me put it into context right now. You see, hydropower in general accounts for about 20% of electricity generation worldwide. And if you look at the potential for hydro in developing countries, you're looking at an equivalent of 4 times the installed capacity of Europe, or about twofold, or about double the existing capacity worldwide. So the potential for hydro in the developing world, it's pretty significant.
You mentioned this issue of triple bottom line. So in Papua New Guinea, what do you mean by that? What are the benefits of this hydropower?
Thanks, David. Look, that is a very, very important question. In looking ahead for new power development, we look at power development with a dual perspective of, integrated water management resources and also energy generation. But taking into consideration what we call the triple bottom line, which are social, environmental, and economic benefits. So everybody has learned a lot in the past few decades in terms of how to take into consideration social and environmental issues in hydropower.
Yeah. Can you give us an idea of how we're doing, a bit of a scorecard in PNG? I mean, in terms of how much power, what we're doing with hydropower now?
Well, let me put it into the context of the entire power supply in PNG. You're looking at a country with one of the lowest electrification rates in the world. It's only about 13, in between 10 and 13% of the population have access to electricity. Now, that translates to, in a country of about 7 million people, that means that about 6 million are in the dark.
That's a very powerful statement. 6 million people in the dark. Yes. Yeah.
And we know the role that electricity plays in the economy. You need electricity for health, you need electricity for education, you need electricity for economic opportunities. So energy and electricity in particular, it's a fundamental building block of the economy.
Okay. The government has a stated policy of increasing by 70% by 2030. What's that? Is that something that's feasible? Have we got the capacity to do that in Papua New Guinea?
Well, in looking into that, in the strategic development plan that you mentioned, the government sets this target of 70% in access by 2030. That, let me put it into the context of today's power supply. The total current capacity installed in PNG is about 500 megawatts, right? About 40-45% of that is hydro. The projections for the targeted capacity to reach that level of access would probably look at around 2,000 megawatts. Wow. So that means an increase by 4 times in the existing capacity.
Is that the game changers like the Pararis, or are there other ways we will achieve that?
Well, PNG is very rich in natural resources, and natural resources including for the energy sector development. So, renewable energy offers an excellent opportunity for that increase in generation. You also have other sources like the government is looking into the projections. Natural gas is currently not available for supply in electricity in Port Moresby. Yes. But if it becomes available, hydro and gas could be very good complements.
There's a complementarity there with these, yeah. Okay. Just to conclude, in Port Moresby, we have issues where we seem to sit on a knife edge. We produce just as much as we need. Is there any potential within the systems we have now to extend them? Are we looking? You mentioned the Brown River. Are these things that are feasible and coming on now?
Well, there are potential for further developments, in hydro, that could feed into the Port Moresby grid, which is, by the way, the one that is growing, the fastest in terms of electricity demand.
The Rauna scheme, we've used all the water there. We're not looking at Rauna 5s, Rauna 6s.
Well, look, the head of IPBC today was mentioning other refurbishments around the different systems. Now, so there's potential for refurbishing some of the existing capacity, and you're looking into a situation where some of the existing generation plants in PNG are getting close to the end of their economic lifetime. Yes. So in order to sustain the current electricity demand, some refurbishment would need to be practiced as well.
Generally, huge potential in Papua New Guinea, I think, is the message we can give to viewers, and obviously government has that on schedule, looking at that as part of their agenda. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you for being with us. That was an interview with Roberto Aiello, Senior Energy Specialist for East Asia and the Pacific with the World Bank. That's it from Business PNG. Thank you.
And that has been our edition of Business PNG. To view our programs online, you can log on to our website at www.mtv.com.pg and go to our Business PNG page. If you have any comments or suggestions, send them through to the address now shown on your screen. Until next Tuesday, I'm Festus Magna.